bombs and counter-bombs. Both seem to be in short supply for the Western coalition, and this is a major pain point for Europe and Ukraine in particular, because while Kyiv is getting hounded nightly, there are a ton of tools available to defensively or proactively protect the city. It is just that the United States is using all of them in Iran. And yesterday, we got a look at just how bad things are. So pick up the phone, because it is time for today's Geopolitics Helpline. What should we make of the report that the United States has used up most of its missiles in Iran? Well, we are about to go on a journey today. The viewer is referencing this article from Reuters that came out yesterday. The US has used virtually all of its long-range precision missiles during the Iran war, sources say. To spoil the rest of the video, that statement is probably kind of true if you squint hard enough, but the headline is awful, the article does not provide the proper strategic context, and indeed, the real strategy behind what is going on is far more interesting than the claim by itself. If, emphasis on if, you wanted to use a bunch of missiles in Iran, then this is how you would want to structure it. Indeed, before we delve into the report, let me preface the rest of this video by saying that we are not going to be spending our time adjudicating whether the US foray in Iran was a good idea. Even aside from that, we are not going to examine whether it would have been a better idea to just save everything to deter China from making a future move against Taiwan. Rather, we will be focused on the far more narrow question of how bad the US missile situation is, and whether anything in that report makes strategic sense, because a silly war does not imply a silly prosecution of the war. I also need to further preface things by further confirming that the entire Western coalition is precariously short on interceptors. Confusingly, there was a separate, much more concerning report yesterday that 80% of the US THAAD inventory had been depleted. That is a problem that Ukraine is understanding all too well, as Kyiv takes a nightly ballistic missile beating. But there is an entirely different problem with the thinking on that front that we will have to save for another time. All we will try to do today is understand whether and why the United States has used virtually all of its long-range precision missiles in the Iran war, as the headline claims. And if we are going to take the headline literally, which perhaps we should, the answer is absolutely not. In fact, the very first sentence of the article tells a completely different story. The US Army has used up much of its global stockpile of highly accurate long-range missiles during its 5-month war with Iran, according to 3 people familiar with the data. The United States is not the US Army. The US Army running out of missiles is not the same thing as the United States running out of missiles. The second sentence further reduces the scope. The missiles are principally the Army's surface-to-surface weapons, known as Army Tactical Missile Systems, ATACMS, and Precision Strike Missiles, PrSM. You already know about ATACMS. Those are the longer-range missiles that HIMARS launches. PrSMs are the successor to ATACMS, able to fit 2 missiles into a single HIMARS launcher instead of the one for ATACMS, capable of going 200 kilometers further for now, and yet further with a future model, and racing to their target faster. Now, we are already looking at some imprecision between the first 2 sentences. For sentence 1 to be true, you would have to not count Gimlers, the other missile that HIMARS can fire, as a long-range missile. Whether a 70-kilometer radius qualifies is in the eye of the beholder. But the US Army alone probably has tens of thousands of those in its inventory. Indeed, estimates place the United States as having held around 25,000 to 30,000 at the start of the Russian invasion. US manufacturers also produce 10,000 each year, with the rate scaling up. So, despite Ukraine using a ton of them, there would have to be a massive, unaccounted-for void for the United States to not have a large stockpile at the ready. Aside from that, the US Army also has a land-based version of the Tomahawk missile. This is unequivocally a long-range weapon, as it can go farther than even a PrSM can. Tomahawks generally have a stockpile problem too, which we will return to later. but those have not been virtually all used. The article itself says it is less than half, so we already need to amend the first sentence. And to be fair to Reuters, I do not even think that the necessary clarification of the first two sentences of the body of the article is all that bad. The specific claim gets clarified quickly. What does concern me greatly, though, is a title that does not accurately reflect the article's claim. You do not need me to tell you that the online discussion responds to titles, not the actual article content. And the title tells us that the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force are now virtually out of missiles, as well as any other US entity that might have been holding on to a few. So, yesterday, we had a lot of people discussing how the United States has left itself without any missiles to fight China, even though that is not what the article was telling us. Now, the United States is still desperately short on missiles. It is just not completely devoid of them, and the gaps in ATACMS and PrSMs serve an actual strategic purpose. To paraphrase noted 24th century military theorist Jean-Luc Picard, if we are going to be damned, let's be damned for what is really in our stockpiles. From here, let's take the report at face value. There is still reason to be cautious there. Only 2 of the sources use the virtually all language. Based on another source from the article, this is hyperbole. The United States restocked from other holdings around the world as it went. It is unfortunate that we live in an era where national security issues have become politically polarized, and so leaks no longer have the same credibility that they once did. But I think that the claim is believable at face value because it is part of a sensible military strategy. Well, sensible given that the Iran war is happening. In an ideal world, the United States would be dropping JDAMs out of planes to hit Iran. There is essentially an unlimited supply of those, so it is the most cost-effective solution. The problem there is that you need to clear anti-aircraft systems to allow your planes to safely fly. Now, the United States had established air superiority at the beginning of the war, largely through firing the fancier missile systems first. The ceasefire, that never fully was a ceasefire, nonetheless allowed Iran to regroup. And so the United States finds itself in an awkward middle position, wanting to keep pressuring Iran with strikes, but also not wanting to expend so many more missiles to reach the point where it no longer needs to rely on them. Call it the paradox of JDAMs. You need to exhaust your tomahawks so that you do not exhaust your tomahawks. That is how you end up in a world where the United States could be short on its supply of missiles. Again, taken as a given that you want to do this, the question becomes how you deplete your missile stockpiles. Because this is the United States that we are talking about. There are a ton of different systems that the Pentagon can choose from. And further imagine that your chief secondary concern is preparing for a conflict against China. Then this turns into a game of preserving tomahawks. They have incredible range and are normally fired from ships, which can further extend their reach. In contrast, consider ATACMS. With a strike radius of 300 kilometers, the only way to hit the PRC is to pre-station them in Taiwan. The Pentagon has been hesitant to do this because of the limited numbers of them left, which would prevent their flexible use in other theaters. But there is a second hang-up here too. They have a limited shelf life that is fast reaching its end. Given that the window for the PRC attacking Taiwan is a few years away and extends much past that, ATACMS are perhaps the least useful missile to keep around for that fight. Obviously, Ukraine thinks that there are better uses for ATACMS, but Trump disagrees. We also should not forget that Biden was not generous with ATACMS either, providing some short-range ones early on and only approving strikes inside of Russia after he lost the 2024 presidential election. So, once more, if you do not place much value on the Ukraine situation, and you are of the mindset that Iran needs to be struck, ATACMS are the first thing that you should deplete. Ironically, the PrSM situation is the exact opposite. They are brand new. The US Army probably only had less than 100 before the war began, because they just started rolling them off of the assembly lines. Thus, having virtually run out does not mean much here because there was no true stockpile to begin with. Further, it makes sense not to stockpile them at all right now. PrSMs have never been battle-tested. When you literally have thousands about to enter production, now is the time to discover if there are any serious issues with their design. Fixing those potential problems far outweighs any possible information China might also learn from seeing them in action. So, you dump the old stuff because you need to get rid of it. You dump the small quantities of the new stuff to figure out if they work. And you preserve, at least to some degree, the more valuable weapons for later. For a final time, this does not mean that the Iran war was a good idea. But it is career staffers inside the Pentagon who make the allocation decisions. And this is the sensible one to choose. So, no, the United States has not run out of virtually all long-range precision missiles. The US Army has run out of a couple of select types of long-range precision missiles, because it makes way more sense to lean on them than evenly distribute the depletion rates across all types. Meanwhile, if you are just starting to watch the Geopolitics Helpline, it will be a long time before you deplete the back catalog. Click here to get started. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.